Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched, where this week, in keeping with the holiday season, I watched Anna and the Apocalypse from 2017. Now, I was trying to rack my brain for exactly when I came across this movie or how it came into my list, because it's not necessarily, or I didn't think it was necessarily in my wheelhouse, and it's not the kind of thing that I necessarily would have directly stumbled upon at random. I am pretty sure that either a friend recommended it at some point or some other context like that, because I can't for the life of me remember how else this ended up on my list. It has no actors or really any connection to anything else that I've watched that I can find. It's kind of beyond me how it ended up on my list. But I do remember having looked at it a couple of times on my list and go, yeah, I meant to watch that at some point. What's interesting is that I didn't know what I was getting into when I started watching this, on a lot of levels. One is just the genre, because I thought this was a Christmas horror comedy film, and it is in fact a Christmas horror comedy musical. It is heavy on the musical, and I was not anticipating that at all. So when they struck up the first song, I was completely baffled, complete with, dance number. So that was weird. And now coming back to look at some of the documents for this movie after the fact, I'm seeing some wild stuff about this movie. Primarily this one line that I've seen on posters, and I assume it's from a review that was made of it at some point, but where somebody apparently said, "Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land." And wow. I suppose it's Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land if you only know one zombie movie and one musical, and those are Shaun of the Dead and La La Land, because this is closer to High School Musical meets The Dead Don't Die. That movie we watched a little while back with Bill Murray and Adam Driver. This was not this movie. Those are some tall, even if it was a really good movie, saying that you are saying or claiming or having somebody else say that you are Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land is some very, very big boots to fill. I cannot think of a single movie that competes with Shaun of the Dead in its category. And while I, as we have gone over on this show before, don't particularly like La La Land and think it is a deeply flawed movie, it is still a well-made movie. And a lot of people really, really like it. So that would be kind of an insane thing to claim, even if this movie was really high budget and really good. And it's not. It's very low budget as far as I can tell, and it's, not to bury the lead too much, it's kind of fine. It's acceptable. That's kind of the most I can say for it, but we'll get into the details of that. This is clearly made on a very small budget by some presumably indie filmmakers, and apparently is based on a short that was made and was nominated for a BAFTA, I think. I don't know anything about that. I just saw that in passing just for recording this. But it's clearly made on a small budget with no recognizable actors and, very limited scope and ability, and that's fine. And I just can't get past that Shaun of the Dead meets La La Land, because I was thinking about Shaun of the Dead myself while watching this before I had ever read that line. Let's get into talking about the themes and the genres that this movie is in. You've already probably had the thought that Christmas zombie comedy musical is kind of a lot of things to do in one movie, right? And I would agree. I think that that is a concept with great potential. It has all the makings of something like Cannibal the Musical or something like that. Something that's really over the top and cheesy and knows what it is and is very like theatrical in the stage sense. And understands that it's there for a good time. It's there to be kind of goofy and not take anything too seriously. And this movie, what I will say for it, this may be damning it too hard with faint praise, but this movie really doesn't do anything gravely wrong, but it doesn't do anything particularly well either. It doesn't manage to do any of its genres any particular justice, and it doesn't manage to mix them in really any meaningful way, which is a big problem when you make your movie as complicated as Christmas zombie comedy musical. Because it does little bits of each of those things kind of well, but never together and not with any consistency. So let's go with the Christmas part of it, because that's the reason I sort of grabbed this for today. This movie is not really a Christmas movie at all. In fact, like thematically, it is completely not Christmas, and in fact is almost antithetical to Christmas, because they could have adapted the core plot line, which the core background plot is about some kids graduating from high school and the anxieties of going off into the world after entering adulthood. But if they had instead made the movie about a trying Christmas period that maybe included that, those high school anxieties and those sorts of things, that would have made it more Christmassy. But they didn't. The only thing that's really Christmas about this is the time of year that it is filmed and some of the props, and that's really about it. That is basically all that's going on as far as Christmas. There are literally a few words in a few songs that make note of the fact that it is the time of year, big air quotes. So yeah. It's not a Christmas movie. It is not even really in passing. And in fact, it would have been a more cohesive narrative if they had completely removed that element. So, strike one. Zombie. Yes, this is a zombie movie. A big chunk of the movie is about zombies. However, it doesn't do zombies very well or compellingly either. It is very reliant on the standards of the genre and having a preconceived notion of zombies and zombie movies. The characters are all, when confronted with zombies, are immediately aware of what a zombie is, not because they know it in reality of their world, but because they know it in the fiction of the world of the movie. And so they never do anything to explain why or how the zombies show up, how they're being dealt with, etc. And so instead, all that you really get is that the zombies are a contextual threat to the characters, and that people will come to harm because of the presence of zombies, and that is a sort of general environmental pressure on them. But it doesn't really do anything to explore the plot of the zombies, and the level of threat of the zombies varies dramatically from scene to scene, where sometimes it seems like they're no threat at all, and sometimes it seems like they're a completely imminent, deadly threat. Um, and that's really kind of confusing and not very good for a zombie movie. There's also other more pressing issues for all of the characters that are not the zombies, and so it distracts from both the core sort of narrative and the side narratives. There are like multiple other sort of kind of villainous characters who the main characters and the main sort of protagonists have to contend with, but they are not really connected in any way to the zombies and that sort of thing. The most they do is that one character sort of uses the zombies to their advantage to get what they want in a situation. But even that plot is so thin on the ground and disappears immediately that it kind of makes no sense. I will give it one point, which is that it does one thing, or maybe I'm giving it too much credit here. It does one thing that I have never seen before in terms of zombies as metaphor. We've talked about zombie movies a bunch on this show, but this movie does something unique. Often zombies are used as a sort of a metaphor for society as a whole, whether that's about consumerism or social change, social upheaval, or all sort of different sort of social and economic relations, these sorts of things. Both the zombies and vampires have been used sort of similarly in this regard as a multifaceted metaphor, depending on context, to talk about social structures and what sort of the looming threats behind people's lives are, that are sometimes a little bit nebulous in their level of danger or how they affect people. And I will say, perhaps again giving it too much credit, that this movie I think does something unique in terms of saying that using the zombies sort of as a metaphor for that anxiety of upheaval that our main character Anna, and really all of her friends and the people around her, are going through a very sort of tenuous time in their life, where they are contending both with a changing of their own lives, a splitting up of their families and friends into going different places and doing different things, a lack of confidence, a lack of support, and all these other things. And I think as a very loose metaphor that is sort of addressed as what the zombies are. They are sort of acting as a parallel for the breakup of the social structures that have been so set in stone for these characters' presumably entire lives up to this point. Many of the characters have also experienced significant changes or loss prior in their life that is addressed directly and then sort of mirrored in a fuzzy kind of way by things that happen to them with the zombies. It's not particularly heavy-handed. I don't think if you didn't hear me say it, then I don't think this would be like, it's not whacking you over the head with some kind of metaphor here. This is just sort of my interpretation of why zombies were used in this literary context, so to speak. So, point to it there, but I don't think it's a very good zombie movie. It's not very compelling as a threat. It's not very consistent, and it's not particularly funny either. Which gets to the third part, which is the comedy part of it. It's not funny. This movie is I think it got like one laugh out of me and a couple of smiles, but for the most part, the writing for this movie is just not great to begin with, and its comedic work is pretty poor. Even in like a dry British kind of way, it doesn't really hit those beats either, and which makes it, particularly insulting when you have a comparison to Shaun of the Dead, which, Edgar Wright and co. are the some of the absolute peaks in the modern era of that sort of dry British humor, turned up to its absolute maximum, for the effect of, genuine hearty laughter. And this movie just, it seems like it's attempting it, but I can say for it, it's at least not trying dramatically and failing dramatically. It's just kind of trying and kind of not hitting. It's not bad, it's not insulting, it's not swinging for the fences and taking itself too seriously or anything like that, or believing that it's funnier than it is. It's just not funny very much. And so that gets to sort of the last part, which is the musical part, which again came out of the blue for me. I will give it possibly the most credit in this area. The music is not horrible. For a small movie that has this many songs in it, and there are some pretty bad songs in here, but for the most part, they're serviceable, completely unmemorable, and not like there's one that I kind of enjoyed, but they are mostly very musically uninteresting and lyrically uninteresting, or even lyrically inappropriate. And that really is what brings us around full circle to talk about all the genres at once, which is that the musical at its peak should be tying together all of the other three genres with, witty writing and smart references and talking about the events that are unfolding. And it doesn't do any of that. Most of the lyrics are trite, shallow, kind of, again, inoffensive but uninteresting, and only sort of cursorily related to the characters themselves and what's happening to them and their feelings. They're pretty poorly written, and then they make very limited reference to anything about Christmas. They make very limited reference to anything about zombies. They mostly make reference to the other social situations that are going on with the characters, these sort of the foreground plots about what each of the characters is struggling with at the time. And that's fine. Or it would be if the movie didn't so badly need to tie itself together at this moment with something. And the music is not doing that. So we have a movie that is really not hitting any of its core beats, but is at least trying to. Actually, as an aside there, the music is not very good. It's not great. It's okay. I will give them credit that there is a lot of effort that seems to have been made into the choreography. Not that the choreography is particularly good, but they have made an effort to put choreography into scenes. And that's really, especially towards the front half of the movie, it's a little less contextually appropriate in the latter half. But that was the first thing that sort of sent me on the High School Musical route of thinking of things, because this feels like a production that should have been on a stage instead of on a screen. And that is extended both towards sort of the story as presented, as well as some of the skills and talents on display. But we'll put a pin in that for a minute. this movie is really not hitting any of its beats, but like I said, it's sort of just okay. I would much rather watch this film than like schlocky Hallmark holiday movie garbage that's been phoned in. Um, that's not a very high bar, but it's, I want to indicate that this is not a bad film. It just feels amateurish and unpolished and needing, a lot of work to become a real great cinematic production. And as somebody who's a fan of zombie films and musicals and comedy, not so much holiday films, but whatever, maybe I have too high of expectations or demands. There are certainly worse things you could watch in this sort of area of movies, but I'm just so blah about it. It's not, thankfully it doesn't stray into the area of being truly boring, which, as I've talked about many times, is a very damning and significant problem. If your movie is dull and uninteresting, then that's sort of the death knell no matter what else you do. So the movie is at least trying. It feels like a small indie, even student film, fan film, that sort of thing. It feels more like an homage to a lot of things that it is being compared to, more than really being anywhere in the same league. But I appreciate that it's trying. So let's talk about the production and the cast and all that. The main character, Anna, who's played by Ella Hunt, Ella is totally serviceable in this role. I think she's probably the best actor by far. I don't think any of these actors had any real notable roles or anything before this. Maybe some small things, but she's totally serviceable. I think, unfortunately, she's, like everybody else in the film, dramatically underwritten and doesn't have a particularly compelling arc or character development or anything like that. And so having to attach ourselves to her is a little bit of a trying process. But as a performance alone, I think she's doing totally serviceable, actually pretty good work. The rest of the cast, I would say, mostly do serviceable work. And I, can't be too bothered by it when it's, there isn't a lot of information about this. So I don't know how much this cost. I don't really know how indie it is, but I'm assuming it's fairly low budget indie kind of thing. The rest of the cast is definitely not as good as Ella. They really vary character to character, and I have to, caveat all that with saying that, as usual, if a character is poorly written and poorly directed, then it is very difficult for an actor to put on a good performance. And so this is not a solely on the actors kind of thing, of course. So the acting is totally fine. A sidebar on that as well, I don't actually know. I should have paid more attention, but I was sort of tuned out by the very end. I didn't pay enough attention during the credits, but I could swear that a bunch of the vocalists are not the same as the actors. I don't know if that's the case or not. I may be totally wrong on that, and in fact, they may all be, all the songs may be sung by the actors who are acting them in the film. However, the audio mixing on them is so poor, and the sort of the timing in a lot of cases, the timing sync between the sung version of the song and the lip syncing being done by the actor on screen is often, it's not horrible, like it's not terrible, but it's off enough that combined with the clear change in vocal tone, where it's like this song is being sung in a recording studio, and the rest of everything else in the movie is recorded with live, music from the vocals as recorded on the site, on the shoot. So the change in vocal quality is rather glaring. And so there are a couple of actors who don't even sound like the same person. That's not necessarily doesn't mean they're not the same person. There are a lot of voices where people's speaking voices and singing voices do not sound anything alike. So that just may be the case with a bunch of these actors. Again, with this on the same vein, a lot of these actors have reasonably thick accents, and in a lot of cases that those accents disappear in significant ways during singing. But again, that's not unheard of either, that it can be fairly normal for a lot of people's accents to sort of disappear, at least partially, when singing. I could get into that, but I won't. So that it may just be a case of the audio is so inconsistent between the acted scenes and the sung scenes that it just sounds jarringly different. But I don't know whether everybody actually sung their own songs or not. When you have a lot of songs that are not very well written, and you also have a script that is not quite sure what it's doing and is not very well written, and you have characters who are not very well developed, that really makes it very hard for almost anything else in the film to be particularly extraordinary. And especially for a movie that is trying to do this many things, that makes it very hard to get engaged with a film. Whether it is the comedy aspect or the horror aspect, or really even the Christmas seasonal holiday aspect, you need to have an emotional engagement with the characters. And unfortunately, none of the characters are particularly interesting or compelling, and their personal struggles are not developed or explained particularly in depth in a way that feels anything other than perfunctory, really. Most of their troubles are very sort of surface level, not that big of a deal. Some of the things that have happened to them in the past, previous tragedies and things, are of note. But again, in order to care about those sorts of things, you need to care about the characters in the first place. And there's simply not enough time and not good enough writing to develop these characters really in any way. Almost all of the characters are their tropes, their types, their stock characters from other things you've seen before. And the movie is heavily relying on that being the case, I think, in order to tell story without telling story. You just sort of make assumptions. This is the bully character. This is the best friend character. This is the weird couple character, whatever, this is the grumpy dad. So everything's very stock. And that's, again, can be okay. But when you want me to be thinking about horror and zombies and emotions and threats to the character, whenever anything bad happens to one of the characters, I don't feel particularly much about it. I'm not particularly engaged with the characters. I might feel bad in a totally sort of what's the word I'm looking for, a detached way of it is sad that nice character is going through a bad thing right now. And that's about as close as I'm getting to feeling particularly much about these characters, which is really, again, sort of a damning of these other genres that it's failing to act upon. Because you can look at something like Shaun of the Dead, which is a very funny movie, and yet because it does really good character development, you feel deeply for all of the characters present. And when something bad happens and the comedy drops, you genuinely feel it really, really well. And yes, I recognize that it's like not fair to compare it to Shaun of the Dead, because Shaun of the Dead is such a masterclass in filmmaking of all kinds. But listen, when you compare yourself to Shaun of the Dead, you kind of made your bed and now you got to sleep in it. It's not nailing that. It's not doing any character development. It's not making me feel a lot, and I'm just disengaged from the whole process. Another thing that sort of took me out of it was that all of the actors they've got to all be in their 20s, if not 30s, and they're acting as high schoolers, and that is not unheard of, but I don't believe it. I can't. And so when the writing is not very good, you can fix some of that with writing. There are certainly plenty of movies with much older actors playing characters maybe even half their age, and it works because the writing's really good and their acting's really good and all these things. But this movie is not going to be the one to make that happen. And so mostly I'm looking at what look like a bunch of post-college graduates pretending like they are having boring high school, struggles, air quotes, there. It's not very believable. And again, I don't blame the actors very much for that one. I think that's mostly on the writing and directing. As far as the rest of the production goes, like I said, I don't think there's a lot to say about the production values. I don't think this had a huge budget. I don't think they were, going crazy trying to make this the most polished thing with incredible sets and stuff. All of the locations seem to be real world locations. Probably, they just got permission to film in local school and local building and whatever, and that's totally fine. But it has an effect on it. And then the cinematography is pretty poor and actually undoes a lot of... There are a few shots I actually do really like where... No, I can't really even give the movie credit for that, because almost all the shots I really like, I like because I've seen them done better by other movies before, and I'm pretty sure that it was just the filmmakers doing certain types of shots as an homage to other better films. And so they're executed well enough, but they're not particularly great, and they're certainly not consistent enough to give them any significant credit there. There's a lot of pretty poor framing and cinematography. There's a lot of very over busy camera movement that could have been more locked down. There's a lot of odd angles from vertical, both undershots and overshots, that I just don't think are necessary. They are more visually distracting, and they detract from the flow of the shots. I've talked about this a little bit before. I forget what on, but it's very important when you're doing shot-to-shot editing that your shots line up so that a viewer's eyes naturally flow from one point in one shot to the next point in the next shot. And this movie is doing too much with its camera a lot of the time, and so my eyes are often darting around trying to find where I'm looking. Not universally so, but it's pretty consistent, especially when the sort of tempo goes up on the movie. When it's doing action scenes or really anything with a higher pace, it really starts to be almost dizzying with how much it's doing, and not for really any particular great purpose. It's just kind of there. It's not atrocious, but it's trying too much to do something that it doesn't need to do. Is there anything else to talk about as far as this? I mean, it's just a very inconsistent movie. It's doing its best. It's kind of charming in that regard. And like I said, especially when it comes to holiday movies, you could do a lot worse than watching this. So if you're just kind of curious and want something to throw on, and it's not going to be offensive to you, and it might get a few moments out of you, then this is okay. But it's just not doing a lot very well. It's not really doing any of its genres much justice, and I mean, I don't think it's horrible, but it's not great. It's a curiosity, and it makes me wonder more how it ended up on my list. And if whoever recommended it to me happens to see this video, then they can let me know. But yeah, kind of a curiosity, and it's a little odd. But yeah, I don't know. There's my video for Christmas, I guess. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched, and I'll see you for something different next time.